Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Welcome to the Heat Check Hangout. I am your host for the evening, Riley Davis, joined as always by my co-host, Connor Hope, and we are without Brian tonight, but, you know, the two of us will be holding it down. So how are you doing? How are you doing this evening, Connor?
Could be better. I was able to make some pretty good shrimp fried rice during the second half of that Gonzaga game, which, you know, I wish I wasn't cooking during the second half of that Gonzaga game, but, you know, here we are.
Yeah, for those who don't know, if it wasn't obvious, we just got finished watching Texas sort of run Gonzaga off the floor in Austin tonight, and I know listeners will feel zero sympathy for us as Carolina and Gonzaga fans, the fans of the number 1 and number 2 teams in the nation, respectively. But both of us come into this night a little bit, maybe a little bearish on our teams, a little bit disappointed through the first couple games, but who knows? Maybe they'll get it together as the season continues. I think, judging by what Carolina did last year, judging by what Gonzaga has done pretty much for the entirety of Mark Few's tenure there, they got a pretty good chance of figuring things out. But we can start there tonight and just talk a little bit about what we just witnessed. So, Connor, what would you say ended up being what primarily plagued Gonzaga tonight?
First off, I think part of it was, and you can agree or disagree with the actual call. I know I tweeted out that the refs are nerds, which I tend to do when they give out texts that are unnecessary. But Nolan Hickman started off the game pretty well. Hit 2 threes, hit the second three to put the Zags up 10-5. It looked like there was some jawing from the Texas bench that he turned around and kind of jawed back. And, you know, the second person that says something is always the person that gets the call. And it seemed to throw him off. And Gonzaga just folded, right? You know, they weren't playing outstanding in those first minutes, but they were holding their own. They were kind of dictating the pace and the tempo of that game. But that went from a 10-5 to a 10-7 in the ball to Texas, and Texas didn't really look back. But again, you know, you can talk about three-point defense all you want, but when Texas averaged 3.5 made threes per game on 20% over the first 2 games, and then does what they did from 3 against Gonzaga. Albeit you could talk about weak closeouts and weak contests from Gonzaga. I think part of that was because they were so focused on trying to prevent the dribble drive that they almost didn't want to overcommit. But like, it's not bad luck. It's just, I mean, like I said on Twitter, the NFL would drug test Tyrese Hunter and Marcus Card tomorrow if this was a football game in the NFL. So unbelievably played game by Texas. They did everything they could to limit Drew Timme, and no one else really. I mean, they picked the 2 players they wanted to beat them. The 2 players they wanted to have to beat them were Nolan Hickman and Anton Watson. And we saw that play out in the first half, where we came out of the first half. Those were the 2 leading scorers from Gonzaga. And that's not necessarily a good thing for Gonzaga. So, you know, it's early. Gonzaga's a work in progress. And this is a bad loss. But they'll figure it out. They'll figure out the right rotation, the right way to play defense. You know, it might not be the number 2 team in the country like people thought it was. I don't know if you had them number 3. I had them number 3 coming into the season. But I still think this is kind of a top 4 seed team at worst. We're seeing the floor from Gonzaga. I think there's only up from here, but obviously their big wins have to come early in the season. So they have a little bit less runway to build to that. But with UNC, I mean, UNC, I have no worries about. They just look lazy against bad competition.
Well, we can stay on Gonzaga before we get into Carolina a little bit. I'm going to put that off, deflect a little bit, because I'm a little more worried than you are, but that could be my fandom in the way. With Gonzaga going into the season, I had them. I think I had them at number 4. I had them at 4 behind UNC, Houston, and Baylor. And I was a big fan of Nolan Hickman's coming out of high school. Watched some of his games at Wasatch and thought his ability to create off the bounce would start to translate in his freshman year. And I know we didn't see that as much. And he had a couple. I want to say he had a couple good passes tonight. I didn't see the assist numbers, but that was something else that I thought stuck out to me from him in high school. But the reason why I was lower on Gonzaga was just some of the question marks around him and Salas, even though I believe in both of them stepping into bigger roles. And but going to this game specifically, sort of from an outsider perspective, you sort of hit on it, Connor. I think some of the shots that Texas hit, it just felt like every time the ball left Tyrese Hunter or Marcus Carr's hands, it was going in, and more often than not, it didn't. And with Hunter, it wasn't just the threes; it was also him getting to his mid-range shot, to where he had one play in the second half where he shot fake from the corner, drove, hit a little mid-ranger that, if probably 90% of guards take that, you're thinking that's a terrible shot. Just taking a mid-ranger shot pretty early in the shot clock, but he swished it, and it just felt like one of those games to me where Texas got up for it. They had their crowd more or less behind them. It's like, I'm not going to act like Texas's arena is an amazing home court environment, but they definitely got up for this one, and it just felt like one of those games where with the crowd behind it, that got hot, couldn't miss. So all in all, for Gonzaga, if I was a Gonzaga fan, I wouldn't be panicking. Like you said, I still think a top four seed is probably about what Gonzaga fans can continue to expect. But yeah, it is just odd seeing a Gonzaga team on the receiving end of a shellacking like this after we've gotten used to seeing them do this the last few seasons.
Yeah, and I think, when you're looking at Hickman, right, he's not Suggs, he's not Nembhard, he's not even Josh Perkins or Nigel Williams-Goss. I think, at his ceiling, he's probably Kevin Pangos, which isn't a bad thing. But when you look at Kevin Pangos, his best season probably was that year where David Stockton was starting at the point and Kevin Pangos was playing that secondary point position, similar to what you had with Nembhard when Suggs was there, or with Perkins when Williams-Goss was there. And the fact that they're relying on such a young player to step into this starting point guard role when that's not kind of what he played even last year, it's going to take some time. But, I think in due course, they'll figure it out, right? It might be that Hickman plays off the ball more and you have a Malachi Smith or a Rajir Bolton playing the one. But, for me, the offense hasn't looked good the past two games. A lot of that can be just the atmosphere and the defense of Texas and playing on a aircraft carrier. The defense is the biggest struggle. And even if they lose on Sunday against Kentucky, which I think is possible, as long as the offense is there or is showing that it's turning that corner, I wouldn't be too discouraged as a Zag fan. I think if we start to get into the PK, the game against Alabama, and we don't see that offense turn the corner into what we have seen from Gonzaga the past couple of years, that's when you start to worry, because the defense obviously isn't there. It's just not. And they're good individual defenders on this Gonzaga team, but I think as a unit, it's not quite where we thought it was going to be, even without Chet Holmgren. So I'm not pressing the panic button yet. Again, it's the second week of college basketball, but if we get to the PK and they don't make the championship in the PK, I think that's when fans will start to turn off this Gonzaga team as anything less than they can make the Sweet 16 and that would be a success in March, which is not where you want to be if you're Gonzaga.
Right, and even mentioning the offense with it, I know you said the defense is still your main concern. You could see the offense figuring out. But something that I think stuck out to me, I wanted to get your thoughts on this, was it looked like Drew Timme, most times when he's in the paint, he's dealing with two or three guys around him, and even, you put him in a ball screen, let him roll to the hoop, and he's not really going to pop out. Seems like there's a guy waiting in the Charger spot, or the help defender, and just daring someone else from Gonzaga to beat them. And I think you get that some maybe with Malachi Smith not being a proven shooter at this level yet, or I should say, adjusting to a higher level of competition than he faced in the SoCon last year. Hickman not being proven. Is that something that you've seen as well? Just with
yeah, if you're playing Gonzaga, if you can help off Watson or Hickman or Salas or even Malachi Smith, although helping off Smith is a little bit. We saw him wide open and he looked very comfortable shooting from three. Right, you're going to do that. You're not going to help off Strother. You're not going to help off Bolton. But you're going to help off any other player that you have on the court. And if they hit the three, they hit the three. But, for right now, I think the best course of action is really, double and triple Timmy. And, this game, I thought outside of the tech on Hickman, which I think at that point you just let it go in such a high-charged environment, the refs called a really good game, right? They called the tech on Watson, which was a tech. That was by the very definition of a contact technical. They called the flop, which can go back and forth, but it is what it is. But outside of that, it was a really well called game. But they let a lot of contact go on both sides. Both teams were able to get a lot of contact. And when you're double and triply teaming Timmy and you're allowed to contact him more than you were in the second half against Michigan State, that's what you get from him. So, it's give Tech. I'm going to give Texas more credit than I think their fans did. They played a near perfect game against Gonzaga.
Yeah, that was where I wanted to pivot next, was what this does to your view of Texas. Because, remind me, where were you on Texas heading into the season?
I had them 15. I think I moved them up to 14. So I had them third in the Big 12, right outside of that top two tiers of teams. Really, it's – and I still have my concerns about Texas. I don't think those concerns have gone away yet. But certainly I think the likelihood that those concerns manifest themselves is much lower than I thought it would be coming into the season, which is what's the dynamic between Tyrese Hunter and Marcus Carr when the backs are against the wall, right? You figured, against Gonzaga, even if Gonzaga loses, if they go on a run, how do they respond? Gonzaga never went on that run. But, when they're playing teams like Kansas and Baylor and all these other teams that those teams are going to go on runs, there are going to be teams that go up on them by 7, 8, 10 points. How does that dynamic in the backcourt work? Because I feel like at their last stops, both of them were pretty ball dominant guards, and they worked well together within the flow of the game. But when you have two players that are capable of being heroes, what happens when they feel like they have to push the ball? And that's still a concern of mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are still valid concerns. I would just say, so far to me, Texas is one of those teams who, going into the year, I had them fourth in the Big 12 behind Baylor, Kansas, and TCU. RIP already to TCU. Maybe y'all get it going, but not exactly lighting the world on fire and making those sophomore and junior leaps that we anticipated throughout the summer. But with Texas, I don't know, something about it. I think I can be easily swayed by coach speak. That's something I've learned about myself. When we were doing our research and our interviews for the ALMANAC, every coach makes me want to buy in that this is the year for their team. And when we did a Twitter space two weeks ago, just leading up to the start of the season and promoting the Almanac and everything, Chris Beard dropped through the space, and there was something about the way he was selling me on this team. I asked him about Dylan Dessou, and he spoke so highly of him to where, here the way he talked about this year's squad, there was it planted this seed for me to think okay, maybe this year is different. Maybe the fortunes of Texas sports will actually reverse, which, let's be real, for the past decade, good things don't happen to the University of Texas when it comes to sports. And with how
that's just the other concern is that, Texas, which is, it's hard to look historically, right, because it's a new coach. But Chris Beard, too, their teams haven't won close games at a high rate. And we still haven't seen them in a close game this year. So
totally fair.
I feel like Texas's ceiling is immense, right? And they can go as far as that backcourt can carry them. However, and it goes to the backcourt, it goes to Chris Beard, it goes to everything. Can they win those tight games? Because it's really tough to win 6 in a row in March without having at least one, maybe two tight games during the course of that run. And I feel like Texas needs to prove, and Chris Beard still needs to prove that they can win close games for people to buy in. But their home court advantage is going to be incredible this year, and I just think they're a program that's set up for success moving forward. This year, though, right? It's questions they need to. Every team, with the exception of like Houston, has questions they need to answer, and so we'll see how that goes going forward.
Yeah, I'm still not ready to concede that their home court's going to be amazing. I know it was a sold out tonight; they are higher than capacity, but I mean, come on, there's too much to do in Austin. Texas fans are concerned with other things. It's such a huge school that just by nature of it, you're gonna have people who don't care. And again, they're historically more of a football school, still fawning over Quinn Ewers and his mullet, even though they haven't been too great in recent weeks. But I don't know. We'll see about it. I think on the court where I've felt most encouraged or most willing to change my view on Texas was sort of Marcus Carr's play tonight. Seeing him chip in 7 assists was something that I don't know if he distributed much last year. And I think as a team, Texas had 17 assists on 34 made field goals, which, that's not an absurd number, but you still love to see, or I shouldn't say that. That's not like an unheard of number before. It's a good number. But seeing the ball movement was something that really did stick out to me, at least watching the game, the ways in which they kind of picked Gonzaga's defense apart. I mean, there was one in particular where it seemed like might have even been Brock Cunningham sometime in the second half who got behind Drew Timme, and it was either Hunter or Carr found him for a quick dunk. Like that type of ball movement that in recent years maybe Chris Beard's offenses they've lacked some of that cohesiveness, and that to me is what stood out watching this game, because I don't think Tyrese Hunter is going to shoot like this all season. I think if he can have more games like this, I want to say, I know we knew he could defend. We knew he was an absolute on-ball demon coming into the season. We knew he was a good passer, and he had that tournament game against Wisconsin where he poured in 6 threes. I think he still shot under 30% for the season, even with that game. But if he can work in some of these type of games where he can go off for 25-plus points, if this starts to happen like once every 4 or 5 games, I mean, their ceiling goes way up and completely changes how I view them, how the rest of the country views them. But yeah, that ball movement was something that stuck out to me for a team and for a coach in Chris Beard, who's had some question marks on that end in recent years.
Yeah, and just off I don't know if we talked about Hickman that much. Looks like he could be out for a while.
Hickman?
Yeah, Few just said his ankle looks pretty banged up. Didn't look great. It was on that last play towards the end of the game, which I don't know why Hickman was even out. Like your starters were even out there at that point, but so we'll likely see a change in the point guard, and I think that might be good or bad for Gonzaga, but it'll give them a different look against Kentucky, a different look maybe in the Phil Knight, and maybe that's just what they need, right? Mm-hmm. Their offense, I feel like, has looked good when they haven't turned the ball over, and a lot of those turnover issues have been on Hickman's shoulders. So if they can get someone else who can run the offense a little bit more efficiently, and not that it's a good thing that Hickman's banged up, but it gives them an excuse to work some more things in there, which I think is always good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we can continue this question of teams that your opinions have changed on 2 weeks into the season. Touched on this some with Gonzaga, with them not quite looking like that top 3, top 4, top 5 team we expected so far. We can get to it with Carolina eventually, but before we do that, I want to see, mention Texas as someone who's quickly ascending in my rankings. But is there anyone you've seen in these first 2 weeks who you're either lower on or higher on going into the season that you're starting to question your preseason prognostication?
I mean, higher on, right, and we are going to talk about this with the Champions Classic. Michigan State has looked like the best team in the Big Ten, for as good as the Big Ten has looked. And granted, it's against Kentucky, which they beat, and against Gonzaga, which we don't know how good Gonzaga is going to be. Lower, I mean, TCU is the obvious answer, right? Let me see if I can think of someone else that I'm just dropping. I guess I'm higher on St. Mary's. Like it's I would not be surprised if we had a split championship in the WCC because St. Mary's has looked really good on both ends of the floor. A lot cleaner than Gonzaga has looked, even though they might not be as talented. So, that's a game where Gonzaga probably wins the regular season title, but St. Mary's, in a one-game setting against Gonzaga, has just as good a chance as anyone to win that game.
Yeah, I haven't got to watch much of St. Mary's left. Sorry, I haven't got to watch much of St. Mary's yet. I just saw that absurd start to the North Texas game and holding the Mean Green to 33 points. And what was it like? North Texas went 1 of 23 for their first 24 shots. That type of stuff is ridiculous. And who knows? Maybe some of it's missed open shots. But just looking at Randy Bennett's pedigree, looking what St. Mary's has been with him, what their defense has been under his coaching, you can't brush all of that off to a fluke. So shout out to the Gales for that. I think I definitely want to get my eyes on them soon because. Who knows? I think did they end up cracking our heat check top 25 this week, or were they just receiving votes?
No, I think they cracked it because I think it was Lucas who had them like 17th or something like that. So
I was gonna say all the West Coast boys make sure that St. Mary's gets ranked with you and Andy and Eli, but Lucas coming in from the Midwest, staying up late.
Yeah, I think Eli and I had them at 25, and Andy had them at like 22 or 23. And then Eli came in with like a top 20 vote. Yeah. Or Lucas came in with a top 20 vote. Yeah.
I think for me, teams who's I've soured on so far has just been Florida State as the biggest one. That's who I'm super concerned about them. And I know their issues date back to even before the season tipped off with Jalen Gainey, the Brown transfer tearing his ACL, and Baba Miller having to serve this ridiculous suspension. But beyond that, I know Naheem McLeod is dealing with an injury, which their front court depth has just been completely gutted. And if there's anything that Leonard Hamilton has found success with over the years, it's having that front court depth. It's having depth along the wing, which they're missing as well. And I don't know how much longer they're going to be able to just – well, really how much longer they'll even try to make Caleb Mills into a point guard. I think that's not working. Matthew Cleveland hasn't been what I thought he would be. He was someone who I talked up all summer as a dark horse ACC Player of the Year contender, and so far that just has not been looking good. And saw today from one of our friends sent the numbers that filtering out Bart Torvik's preseason expectations, Florida State currently ranks 303rd in the nation, which is just quite the fall from grace from a program that's just been the model of consistency over the past half decade plus under Leonard Hamilton. It's killing me, man. I need the ACC to not be abysmal for a second straight year. Someone's got to rise up.
Yeah, look, I don't have a ton of concern yet for North Carolina. I know Duke lost to Kansas. I was actually impressed with Duke, even in the loss. Virginia Tech looks good. It looks like their offense is humming. But yeah, behind that, the ACC, if it wasn't for the Pac-12, everyone would be talking about the ACC as the worst team or the worst high major conference in the country. Mm-hmm. Lucky for them, the Pac-12 went 3-3 against the SWAC.
Right.
So they get a little bit of a pass there.
Yeah, with the ACC, like you said with Duke, that's actually another team who I'm higher on than I was in the preseason. I think, Mark Mitchell is someone who's really impressed me. Just having that type of dude who, while he might not have the most offensive skill yet, his motor's always running. Incredible athletic measurables. And it just seems like he has a nose for offensive rebounds as well. I think Filipowski was someone last night in the Champions Classic who, again, has really impressed me with his offensive rebounding. And I don't know, that's just as someone who's been a Carolina fan for quite some time now and was so used to watching UNC dominate the offensive glass under Roy Williams, it's been something that Hubert hasn't emphasized as much. I'm just not used to seeing other teams crashing the offensive glass like that and being like, oh wow, this is kind of reminding me of what I saw for years under Roy. And so with Duke, the way that they've been able to get production so early on, both out of Mitchell and Filipowski, and I know Filipowski, there were rumors of different media members, different NBA scouts watching them in practice saying that Filipowski was nowhere near ready. I mean, that bodes super favorably for Duke. And yeah, I would say the same thing that you said. Watching them lose in the Champions Classic, don't really have any concerns about them.
My only concern about Duke is the same concern we had at the beginning of the year. It's like there's a lot you really like about Jeremy Roach, and then there's a lot you just are like, like if Dariq Whitehead can come in and be that point guard, I would feel a whole hell of a lot better than relying on Jeremy Roach to lead Duke to 6 straight wins as their primary point guard, because he'll make fantastic threes 1 minute and then like make 3 or 4 boneheaded decisions in a row the next, and you're just sitting there scratching your head wondering why he's so inconsistent, and not just from a shooting perspective but like a turnover perspective, everything like that. Like I feel like sometimes he works too fast. But I mean, the fact that they were able to keep it close for as long as they were against Kansas, and put themselves in a position where like 2 minutes left in the game, I thought Duke was going to win that game. Without Dariq Whitehead, with Derek Lively, in his first game or second game back. Yeah. Just a good signs from Duke, despite the fact that they lost their first real tough game.
Right. Yeah, Lively, to me, it's interesting. He almost, I don't know, I know going into the season, talking to some in the recruiting world, said that, he's more of the NBA long-term prospect his ranking was more based on NBA potential than like the production that we would see from him this year. And yeah, I would say, I know it's early and still way too early to draw any conclusion. I do wonder like how much production Duke will be able to get out of him in this presumably 1 year he has in Durham. Yet at the same time, I think when you look at what Filipowski's already doing on the offensive glass and the ways in which there was one play in particular sticking out to me last night where he had a shot fake from the perimeter, from behind the 3-point arc, drove it to the basket and scored off of it, to where his shot hasn't fallen yet, but still being able to put the ball on the deck a little bit, get to the rim like that. Combined with the fact that you have Ryan Young, who, he's just like kind of a chubby white guy out there who can get buckets with old man moves. Like they might not need Lively nearly as much as you would have thought going into the season, especially with how good Mark Mitchell's defense has been on the interior.
Yeah, I think if Lively can be that person you can call in to almost be like a Chet Holmgren for them on defense for stretches, and can chip in 6 to 8 points a game, like that's just a really good year for Duke. That's what they need out of him, is they need him to be the glass eater, and the rim protector, and they don't necessarily need the offense. We saw in their first game that defense had some of the same issues Gonzaga's defense had last year, early on in that game, and they just didn't have someone who I felt like could consistently protect the rim. And I feel like Lively is that guy who you bring in defensive set moments where you just need someone to deny the paint. And I feel like that is what he's made for, and that's what they're going to use him primarily for this season.
Yep. And we can stay on Tobacco Road and talk a little bit about Carolina. And I also wanted to mention NC State. NC State is someone who I thought they were going to be a bottom 4 team in the ACC, but I think watching, they put up 100 points on FIU, who is a sub-200 team on KenPom. No, nothing great. Put up 99 points on Austin Peay, also sub-200 on KenPom. But, in Kevin Keats' best years, NC State beats up on sub-200 teams in the non-con, and they finish like 8th in the ACC, and then somehow make it into the tournament as like a 9 seed. And they lose in the first round, but like still much better than what NC State did last year. So I'll give it a little shout out for they've impressed me a little tiny bit so far. But yeah, mentioning Carolina, I know I teased that just with some of my concerns. I know you're chalking it up to laziness right now, Connor, and I think that could be some of it. With
not even necessarily laziness, but especially the big three, right? Caleb Love, Armando Bacot, RJ Davis. They feel like players who just they get up for big games.
Yeah.
They're inconsistent, but they're not necessarily inconsistent based on anything other than like, heck, they went into that Pitt game, which should have been an easy win, and didn't come out with that win, right? But then you put them in the tournament, and they nearly win the whole thing. And I feel like I'm not gonna throw up alarm bells. Maybe James Madison, but like that Indiana game or the PK80, right? That stretch from like Portland,
Right.
James Madison through like Indiana. Like if they sweep that, I mean the alarm bells shut off, right? It's can they sweep that? Can they get up for those games? James Madison's the big one, right? I feel like they're still going to go into that game thinking, oh, this is an easy win, but it's not. And we'll see if they can get up for that game. But look, you look at their success rate. The three ball is not falling.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we knew about North Carolina. It either falls or it doesn't, and it hasn't been. But they're still hitting at nearly 60% on the interior. Their free throw shooting is at 76, 77%. They're blocking shots at a really high rate on defense. They are that team that has a terrible free throw defense, which you can't help.
Right.
It's creating turnovers on defense and hitting the three ball, and if they can start doing that, I mean the script flips.
Yeah.
Instantly. So.
Yeah, I mean the three ball again. I do agree with you on that. There have been a lot there against Wilmington in particular. That first game of the season, there was a lot of missed open threes. I think Pete Nance missed at least one, maybe two from the corner that were wide open. RJ Davis and Caleb Love both had wide open shots off the catch that they missed. But to me, what I think has sort of been concerning going into either the laziness or not getting up for games, against Wilmington, they were up 15 in the second half, and I think they let off the gas and said, like, maybe they just thought, oh, we're up 15, they're going to fold. Against Gardner-Webb last night, they were up 16 with 10 minutes left, 14 with 7 minutes left, and they only win the game by 6. That's where I'm just wondering, like, did they hit that certain point? They had some three-pointers fall last night and think, okay, this is it. Gardner-Webb's going to fold now. And when you have that number one next to your name, I mean, it might sound cliche, but that's just not going to happen. Teams aren't going to roll over, especially with Gardner-Webb and Wilmington in particular, two teams from North Carolina, players from North Carolina who probably feel slighted that they never got a call from UNC. They're going to come ready to play. And so that's some of my concern with the execution down the stretch. There's been more defensive lapses. And last night against Gardner-Webb, there was just really poor ball movement for the last 10 minutes of the game. UNC shot poorly and a lot of one-on-one. Not much looking for, like, last year, for example, they had a ton of success with Spain pick and roll sets, getting the ball to Armando, and they've had some early success with that, with getting some looks with Pete Nance going high-low to Armando Bacot, and you just weren't seeing that as much last night. And, you know, I will say what's encouraging is even when the three ball hasn't fallen and when the offense is stagnated, we haven't had a bad Caleb Love game yet. Like, he hasn't had a, 4 for 17 type game, and hopefully those. Well,
he hasn't pushed
the
three ball. He's only shooting 19%, but I feel like he's not only 21 shots over 3 games rather than 21 shots in a single game.
True. So that I would say I'm happy about that. I think that's shown maturation. The pessimistic side would say, like, Carolina's just squeaked by Gardner-Webb and they got a good Caleb Love game. You don't even have that excuse. But it'll be interesting to see. I think the James Madison game, I mean, it should tell a lot just because I think Hubert has their attention, and I think it was even one of the players who said in the post game after the UNC Wilmington game that Hubert was going to have some choice words. Which, when I heard that, I was like, Hubert doesn't have choice words. Like, I can't imagine Hubert using choice words, but it sounds like he's going to do what he needs to do to get them amped up to play, but I don't know.
He didn't come out and say that his point guard is no longer starting during a press conference. So,
shout out Rick Barnes. But yeah, I will say, just being in the post-game conferences with the players, they don't seem panicked. That's one thing that has stuck out to me this year is they seem very relaxed, very much like we know what we need to fix, we'll get it done. Where contrasted to last year when UNC struggled in the non-conference, putting away lesser competition or getting blown out by better competition, it seemed just like this cloud of panic and anxiety just was settling in on the entire program from Hubert down to the players. So that's the encouraging side that I'll take away.
Yeah.
Should we hit the Champions Classic a little bit? Break that down. What we learned.
Let's hit it, because it was and I've been pushing this idea, and I was hoping that it would pan out, because if the Champions Classic fell flat after I've been saying all week that the slow roll was actually good, I would have had to eat my words. But it was fantastic.
I agree completely with you on that. I think like from a big picture standpoint, in recent years, dude, this showcase has felt so boring to me. It's like the first game of the year. You get Duke and Kentucky every year who have a bunch of freshmen who don't know what they're doing, and you roll them out with what's supposed to be four of the bigger brands in the sport, and you just get an ugly product. Whereas, I mean, last night both games were awesome to me. Even with Duke and Kansas stagnating on offense, I was so into that game, even down the stretch when guys were missing shots and no one could hit a three. I think even just having 2 or 3 games for guys to get right before it made a huge difference.
Well, and you had – they stagnated offensively, but you had a bunch of like shots that just felt like big shots in that game, which was really fantastic. And neither of the games was a blowout, which again, like I think coming into the year, you look at that Kentucky-Michigan State game and you're wondering like, can Michigan State hang? And they did more than that. So fantastic product. I hesitate to put Michigan State in the top 10 yet. Mm-hmm. But 4 top 15 teams, like I'm probably moving Michigan State at least that far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michigan State has been awesome in both games. I moved them up into our heat check poll this week. I want to say I had them at 22 or 23, just because I thought in the Carrier Classic, or whatever they call it now, Armed Forces Classic, that they answered some of the questions we had going into the year, mainly how's A.J. Hogard going to be as the point guard, and who's going to be their big man. Is it going to be Jackson Cole or is it going to be Mady Sissoko? And we have our answer to both. I thought against Gonzaga in the Armed Forces Classic, like Hogard was an automatic paint touch every time the rock was in his hands. Like he was throwing absolute dimes to his teammates, whether it was alley-oops, whether it was kind of in the low post and finding guys open on the perimeter. And I thought if he's going to continue to probe the defense like that, his shot will come and go, but he's going to get a lot of open looks for his teammates. And then Sissoko has just been awesome these last 2 games. Like it makes no sense, dude. Like Sissoko was so bad the last 2 years, was unplayable. And I mean, even last summer, Michigan State posted a workout video of Sissoko benching. He was doing dumbbell bench with 40 pounds, which like, bro, you're 270 pounds. You should be lifting more than 40-pound dumbbells. I need to see like 80 to 120-pound dumbbells for me to get excited about that. That was like, that image was ingrained in my head with Mady Sissoko. And I mean, Izzo, again, we talked about player development with few, but that's been a staple. That's been something he's done throughout his career and what he's made his name on. And it's like, he's done it again. We thought he was done. We thought Izzo was cooked.
The only and for Sissoko, the only big man that I think is more surprisingly just like out of nowhere becoming a superstar for me is Oumar Ballo, because like I liked what I saw from him last year, but I mean he's averaging 17.5 points on 6 shots from the field per game. Like
Wait,
he's just
Ballo
getting
is?
to the line. What? Yeah,
Ballo?
he's in the first 2 games. He's
Wow.
He's 10 of 12 over the course of 2 games, 83%, and averaging 11 free throws per game in those 2 games for 17.5 and 8.5 with
Dang.
2.5 blocks. Like, and granted, you adjust for the competition, right? You adjust for who they've played so far this season, but you still have to be impressed, because after Christian Coloco left, you were left going, you know, is Ballo going to be able to do that? And I think so far this season, I mean, again, it's Nicholls, State, and Southern, but he looks pretty good. Like, he looks ready for that role.
Yeah, interesting enough, both those big men are from Mali as well. Did you know that, Connor?
I did not know that Sissoko was from Mali.
Yeah,
but...
Sissoko is also, would it be Malian? Yeah, we'll go with Malian. But yeah, Sissoko, I mean, I thought in that first half in particular of the Armed Forces Classic, he did a really good job of protecting the rim. Timmy got going a little bit in that second half. But then again, last night in the Champions Classic, he helped foul out Oscar Tshiebwe, held his own down there. And just what he's giving Michigan State as a lob threat is so needed. And just seeing him flourish in this 30-minute per game role it feels out of nowhere and borderline miraculous. But
well, and even against Kentucky, right? Sissoko did well. But there were a couple of times, and granted, not overwhelming amount. He's only played 12 minutes per game so far this season. But there were a couple of plays specifically on the defensive end, and I feel like it was maybe a little bit more obvious because of who he was defending. But there were a couple of times where Jackson Kohler looked good defending Oscar Tshiebwe, which I was not expecting after the first two games we saw from Kohler.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, Izzo has his mojo back. I know a lot of Michigan State fans were saying sim the season going into the year, or maybe it was just Michigan fans. But looking pretty good so far, and I think I'd also be remiss not to mention both Joey Hauser and Malik Hall. I mean, Malik Hall is someone who's been awesome as well. Like, hitting three-point shots, making plays with the ball in his hands. Like, he's a stud. And I think Hauser as well. Like, they were running him off of pin-down screens last night, and he was looking like Kyle Guy or Cam Johnson, not Joey Hauser, who was a decent shooter at Marquette and underwhelmed. How many years is this year 3 for him at Michigan State now? He's been in college a long time. But
I think it's year 3.
Wow.
That play they ran at the end of regulation where they ran Hauser off the screen in the corner, and everyone knew that's what they were going to run, right? I was like, oh, Hauser in the corner. Like, you were ready for it, and you just saw the entire Kentucky team fade to the corner, and I think it was Malik Hall up the middle into the paint for the dunk. That was brilliant to me, because even before the play, I was telling my wife, I was like, Hauser's going to take a shot in the corner. Like, that's just what they were going to run.
I mean, I know other people, other podcasts, Field 68 After Dark, like, I've already talked about how great those inbounds plays were, but yeah, you just got to marvel at it.
Yeah.
I feel like you just don't see those type of inbounds plays drawn up, like, especially at the high major level.
You pass the ball to the corner on 99% of those inbounds plays. You pass the ball to Joey Hauser in the corner.
It's insane. Shout out to the Spartans. You want to talk about Kansas at all? Because I feel like they deserve a little bit of love for what they did.
Well, we didn't really talk about Kentucky either.
Oh yeah, let's sit on Kentucky then.
Offensively, Xavier Wheeler might not be the guy, and not because he's bad, but you put the ball in Cason Wallace's hands and good things happen for Kentucky.
Yeah, Cason Wallace is a ton of fun. I think part of it too, he's got a great aesthetic. I love a point guard who wears number 22. You just don't see point guards wearing numbers in the 20s anymore. Almost everybody's a single digit. 8 steals last night, and it's just amazing how his defense is transferred. I feel like, we lose count of how many freshman guards come into college with a reputation as a big-time defender, like Jeremy Roach, for example. And I know it might sound like I'm just picking on Duke as a Carolina fan, but that was his reputation coming out of Paul VI, was he was supposed to be this bulldog defender, and he pretty much got bullied his first 2 years at Duke on the defensive end. But to see Cason Wallace live up to that hype as this defensive menace and then some, pretty spectacular for Kentucky and bodes well for them. And yeah, I know we've kind of harped on not being too concerned about any of these teams, but I would say the same thing with Kentucky. Like, can't say I'm overly concerned about their, Final Four potential, national championship potential after losing to what turns out to be a really good and really freaking well-coached Michigan State team.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're not making mistakes, right? If Oscar Tshiebwe starts that game and plays more minutes, or if he doesn't foul out, they probably win that game. Like you said, I like what I saw from Cason Wallace, and it's, I would even go as far as to say, like, he's Trayvon Duval on defense without taking the risks that Duval took on defense, right? Duval had a really high steal percentage, but also took so many risks that like he just left guys open, and Cason Wallace isn't doing that. And I think that's very important for Kentucky. And you're going to see better things. I know Reeves struggled yesterday, and Frederick, wasn't fantastic yesterday. But like you're going to see some good things out of those two offensively. Frederick's never going to be the defender that you want, but again, I don't think I think both of these teams prove they belong in that conversation for like second weekend, put them down as in Sharpie type of teams.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I know Field 68 after Dark touched on it some. The only thing that I would say is a concern for Kentucky is just Calipari continuing to trot out the Sheboy, Damian Collins, and Severe Wheeler lineups. I feel like you really got to minimize that just with the lack of spacing that lineup creates. But at the same time, I think Wheeler hit 2 threes last night. I mean, Cason Wallace hit 2 threes to where shooting, they theoretically have this and can get by with it. But yeah, I thought Reeves really struggled last night, and they need him to be able to provide some spacing to hit. They need him to hit at least 2 threes a game, I think. And he's someone who I know tore it up in the first 2 games, where I do want to see how he'll translate against higher end competition coming over from Illinois State.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and how about the Jayhawks? Anything that caught your eye about them?
Grady Dick is going to be the most hate. I mean, like he might overtake Drew Timme as the most hateable player in college basketball.
See, I don't get the hate for Grady Dick. I know he's like, for one, I think he
just doesn't look like an elite basketball player until you watch him play.
But he doesn't mean mug or like he's not talking much. Like he's just getting buckets. And that's where I think the meme of like having a punchable face gets so overused to where it's like not even funny anymore. I don't know. Maybe I need Grady to get a forearm tat and to meme mug a little bit if he wants to actually be hated.
But I feel like part of the reason I feel like that would make him less hated. Like I feel like he looks like I'm a prep school boy trying to hoop and I'm damn good at it, and not like every other like the white players that are all tatted up. Like you get it.
Yeah, that is an interesting zig to think. Well, I'm trying to think about the white dudes that
if you give Grady an arm sleeve and like a really good like goatee, like no one hates him anymore.
Yeah, that is a good point. Great counterpoint.
If his name was Grady, but like the right way, Grady, nobody hates him.
I think being named Grady is like that. If your name is Grady, you can't get a forearm tat. That just does not fit the entire the vibe, the brand. So maybe that's why he's not. Maybe that's why he isn't tatted yet. Is because maybe even his teammates trying to get him to the local tattoo parlor in Lawrence, Kansas, but he remembers as he's outside the door, my name is Grady, and I can't do this. But he has been someone who I know Kansas didn't play him for a lot of who's serving as the interim coach right now? His name's slipping my mind. Norm Roberts.
Yeah.
I know he didn't play him for much of the second half because Duke was going after him. Sorry, I'm gonna Google this interim name real quick. We're late enough in the pod where people. Okay, it is Norm Roberts. I got that right. But yeah, with Duke targeting him in that second half, he didn't play much. But being able to come off the bench, hit that big 3, score 7 points in a row, so impressive. And he's just had more in his bag than I realized. And I think it was in the first half where he hit that pretty nasty reverse layup. I don't know if you saw that, but drove baseline. Yep. I don't know if he switched hands midair or not, but it was one of those things where it's like, okay, like this dude is much more than just a 3-point shooter.
Yeah, I mean, he's really good at basketball. But it's like, I mean, he's in the same, not the same mold, obviously, because he's a totally different type of player, but I feel like he's in that same mold as like a Hunter Dickinson, a Drew Timme, like just clean cut white boys with no edge.
Hunter's got some edge.
Hunter's got, Hunter and Timme talk a lot of shit, but I don't think they have that, like, I don't know. they don't strike me as having that edge. They just know that they're better than you, and they talk their shit.
But they're not posting flicks on Instagram. Whereas, if we're sticking with the white boys, like Christian Brown, for example.
Yeah, Christian Brown, or they're not going out and getting the haircut that Podziemski's getting for Santa Clara, right? They're sticking to their prep boy ways. It's, for better or worse, is the way it is.
I also wanted to touch on Kansas's defense some, to where I think when you have McCullough and DeJuan Harris out there together, I mean, that's just like such a frightening perimeter duo to go against. It literally seems like either one of them can get a steal whenever they want. Like if they want to pick your pocket, they can do that and go the opposite direction. And this might sound a little bit like the LeBron line memes that are circulating so much still, but I think DeJuan Harris is someone who I saw 2 years ago playing, I think maybe like 5 to 10 minutes a game for Kansas, and just thought like this dude actually might be legit. Again, we could sticking with the theme of player development, with Bill Self being arguably one of the two best coaches in the game at that. Seeing what Harris did at the bench, did off the bench 2 years ago, he's been able to harness that, and he's a really good passer, really smart basketball player who, just makes stuff happen on defense. And I think Kansas is a team who's, going on to teams who have changed our minds so far. Like, I think they're a top 5 team pretty easily right now.
Yeah. I think I might have had them 6th behind Kentucky, but I like it. Again, you still have questions because you don't know how much you can get out of Udo in the front court, and whether or not that Wilson Adams starting front court is something that can compete with some of these teams that have much bigger, much better, much more experienced front courts. But they held their own against Duke's, at least from a ceiling and talent perspective, pretty good front court. So,
I also love KJ Adams coming off the bench, and he's just like the perfect front court super sub glue guy who's going to get in there, bust his tail on defense. And I think that's going to be a huge boon for Kansas as they're like still figuring out who's going to play the 5 for them. I know KJ's not really much of a 5, but having him come in there and there not being any sort of like defensive drop off from Wilson to him, and just having a dude who's going to be unselfish out there is huge for this team.
No, absolutely.
Anything else that you would add, Connor, just after these first couple of days of hoops in week 2 of the season?
You're seeing and you're seeing teams struggle. There are teams like TCU where I think it's time to throw on the alarm bells. Teams like Villanova, where I feel like you knew it was going to be rough. You didn't know it was going to be this rough, but you knew it was going to be rough to start the year. I would hold off on panicking until they get Whitmore back. Even without Justin Moore, I feel like Whitmore brings something that they don't have, or should bring something that they don't have, and if he can come back and make things better, that would be good. But the mid majors are not scared anymore. We've seen that. And it's not just the competitive mid majors against bottom tier talent, up and down the scoreboard. You've got UC Irvine taking down Oregon. Louisville is the bottom tier high major, so I won't even mention them. But you've got good, maybe not great mid-major or great high majors, but pretty solid ones that are also losing games to these mid-major schools. Whether that translates down the line, who knows? Mm-hmm. But at least to start the year, right? It's, I jokingly said that the Pac-12 SWAC legacy results this year were the worst thing that could have happened to the SWAC, because I don't know how much longer the Pac-12 is going to agree to 3 road games against the SWAC anymore. But it's been a fantastic first week and a half of college basketball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shout out to the SWAC for showing out, and I think I'm going to give some love to the MEAC as well, just with that being the league that I covered for the ALMANAC, and just think in the world of some of the coaches that I talked to there. Just so many great personalities there, so many guys who have fantastic vision for their teams. With Delaware State, you already mentioned Villanova, but Delaware State giving them all they could handle. Norfolk State only lost by 17 to Baylor. And yeah, I know it's still 17, but like I want this Norfolk State team to succeed so badly. And NC Central gave Virginia all it could handle on the first night of the season as well. Both the MEAC and the SWAC holding it down for the HBCUs. Love to see it, and the SWAC evening things up with the Pac-12. Pretty sweet.
Yeah, and some of these things that we like, some of the things that we had questions about haven't been answered or have been answered positively or negatively. Some of the things that we were concerned about have been correct. Mm-hmm. USC isn't that good.
Sticking in the mid majors, just beating teams that aren't bottom feeder high major teams.
Right, and again, like Tennessee, damn good when they're on, but.
Tennessee always blows a game like that, like they did to Colorado, though.
Well, and that's why I was so down on them, right?
Uh-huh.
Was just like they have those games so often.
It's so frustrating.
They are. If Caleb Love was a team personified, that is Tennessee.
Caleb Love. Yeah, I was gonna say Caleb Love was meant to be a Tennessee Vol, but I'm very glad he's a Tar Heel. But yeah, with Tennessee, I wanted to buy in this year where it was like Ziegler year 2 breakout coming. And like we hinted at earlier, now his coach is saying he's not starting. Josiah Jordan-James being one of the best defenders in the country. And then watching that exhibition against Gonzaga where Tyreek Key, just his build, he literally looked like perimeter-oriented Grant Williams, to where I was like, all right, this is the year for the Vols. And they're going to keep the good mojo going off of football. But yeah, I mean, they like I said, I think I still kept them in my top 15. Which SWAC team did Colorado lose to again?
Grambling State.
Grambling State, that's right. Hey, SWAC, better than we thought it was. But that was why with Tennessee, I'm like, they always drop a dumb game like this where their guards shoot like 2 for 13, and they'll be fine. But yeah, I just hope for their sake they can minimize those types of games. But
and how about Brian and his San Diego State Aztecs?
Yeah, if he was here, he'd be talking about them.
They had 7 games all of last year with 74 points or more scored, and they've already had their first 3. And I feel like they pulled off the gas a little bit against Stanford, or they would have broken 80 again.
Right.
Jaden Ledee is what they said that he was going to be.
He is who the show thought he was. Is that the name of that San Diego State Twitter page? The show or something like that? The show as Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
I mean, they've scored 80, 82, and 74, and Matt Bradley has been inept at scoring in those 3 games.
That's wild.
But, yeah, I mean, they're hitting threes. They had 38% in the game against Stanford. And Darian Trammell and Parrish went off in that first game, and they were pretty good from 3 in that second game. I mean, this is a dangerous team, right? Because we know that their defense is going to come around, but their offense looks the part of not a national championship contender, but like they're a team that could find its way into that final weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right.
I had to mention San Diego State since we're a San Diego State podcast.
Yeah,
so.
Right. And keeping it the same, one final team I'll mention, and then we got to sign off. St. Louis, they're one of those teams who I'm like, people always try to get cute and pick 3 A-10 teams to be top 25 good. St. Louis really impressed me just watching some highlights from their game against Memphis last night. Memphis was a team I was starting to buy in on, just watching them handle like a pretty decent Vanderbilt team. St. Louis was able to build a double-digit lead for most of the second half. Yuri Collins has been great. Gibson Jimerson has picked off where he left off, just being a flamethrower. I think Javonte Perkins is getting comfortable. So that's all I got for this week, but just had to give them a brief shout-out for the Bills.
Yep. And how about I mentioned Louisville, but how about the most creative way to lose by 1?
With L. Ellis. I can't believe how much he was flexing after he did that game winner.
They were going ballistic, and I'm like, this is going to be hilarious.
Man, this is where I'm like, I wish that college basketball wasn't such a niche sport, because imagine how many great memes we could get off of that Ellis celebration if, like, the average person cared about college basketball. The average sports fan, even, you know, with how you still see the Patrick Beverly play-in celebration getting memed every day on Twitter. Like, I want that, but without Ellis.
Or the Nick Young three.
Right. That's lasted for a decade. All right. Well, that is all we have for this episode of The Hangout. Once again, I'm your host, Riley Davis, joined by my co-host, Connor Hope. Without Brian tonight, he's he's actually in Charleston, South Carolina, covering the Charleston Classic this upcoming weekend. He'll be cheering on our Colorado State Rams. I was going to say, we are still Colorado State fans on this podcast, even though they no longer have David Roddy, and even though we gotta let the numbers hit for all the San Diego State fans out there. But we haven't forgotten about our first love, the Rams. But yeah, so we will be back next week.
Not next week. We're off for Thanksgiving. We're giving everyone a holiday, but we will be on the week after.
We will be on the week after. My bad.
Don't worry, I'm the producer of this show. It's my fault.
Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.